All right, we are live. Welcome back to Social Business Hour on this March 9th, 2015. I'm Brian Fanzo, known as iSocialFans on the Twitters, as always, joined by my co-host who I left stranded solo last week, who I have to owe some brownie points up that I somehow I have to make that up this week. But how are you doing today, Rachel?
I'm fantastic. Happy Monday, everybody. Very excited for this topic and to have one of our favorites, Julio Viskovich. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. Brian, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, Julia, we were talking about pre-show. We were talking like, we've been engaging, we've been following your content, big fans for a while, and even to the point where we had a couple hangouts together talking about topics and booking this out like last year during social selling hour. So this is cool that it's coming together, and the interesting part is we all know that the change is a big element, and I think a lot has changed even from when we talked back then. So I'm excited for this topic. I love the advocacy idea. Those on Twitter, as always, use the hashtag SBizHour to jump in, answer the questions. Yes, we throw the hashtags up there always. Also want to thank our sponsor. We have actually IBM Social Business, and the New Way of Work team is actually sponsoring our chats this month, which we couldn't be more excited about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about IBM Verse and a couple of the other products they have in other events, bringing some of those guys on. But IBM sees the value in not only embracing the community, but really getting this education out there. So check out the hashtag New Way to Work, and you'll see lots of great content that they're out there sharing. So with that, go ahead and introduce yourself. Give yourself a little background. Give people not only what you're doing now, but kind of what brought you to here, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, sounds good, Brian. It's been a long journey, let me tell you that, man, and it's taken me all over the world. In the last 10 years, I've, of course, been in Canada. I've been in South Korea. I did a little teaching stint over there, came back with a MBA in marketing, moved out to Vancouver to the West Coast, started working for Microsoft at that time, and that's really where I started to really absorb sales and really get, full-fledged, 2 feet in, into sales. So at that time, I was doing retail training for Microsoft, training all of their partners on the products. And what I found at that time was how much more effective my training sessions could be if I involved Twitter, right? If I said, okay, there's a room of 500 people here, and rather than have each and every person put up their hand or be shy or this or that, use the hashtag, tweet it up, and I'll look at my phone during the presentation, and I'll address it in the flow of the presentation. So I started to really have this thing for Twitter. And social media at that stage was really starting to take hold. It started to really move itself into a mainstream mode of communication at that stage. And that's when I started to really see an opportunity, which led me to jump over and work for a little company at that time called Hootsuite, which has now grown to quite a big company, and opened up the door for me personally to where I am today with a company called R-Factor out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and again, a pioneer in the social selling space and a perfect fit for me. So here I am today, sitting here with you and a lovely audience.
No, I love it. I always talk about my unique background going tech and finding social and then kind of bridging. And I just tweeted out, I like yours. Microsoft, I got a couple good friends that work there still today. Of course, big fans of Hootsuite. I know I give a little Hootsuite love. I have it on my desk, and I'm going to the Hootsuite event Saturday down at South by Southwest. And I think it's cool to see not only your progression, and I think that kind of builds your philosophy and story, but also, I mean, all of those companies, probably since you've been there, have changed 4 or 5 times, and then really what you're kind of leveraging at R-Factor. So give us a little background about R-Factor, just so people understand that, and then we'll jump into the questions. I think it's an interesting play. When you say social selling tool, I think it still kind of misses the mark when people really want to, what does that actually do for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because 2 years ago, a tool like this didn't exist. Seeing how social selling's progressed, what people were doing before was leveraging current platforms that were out there, marketing platforms. I mean, we talked about Hootsuite, right? It's a marketing platform. We talked about some of the TweetDeck. Those are marketing platforms built with marketing at heart. They're built for, reach, love, followers, retweets, like favorites, likes, that type of thing. What we build R-Factor on the basis on is revenue. So specifically targeting core selling activities within reps. So empowering them to do what they need to do from a social perspective, but not get bogged down with curating content and all these other things that are much traditionally focused on marketing. So our platform helps them really focus on core selling activities across social media, and then Essentially, it provides a platform for marketing to turn sales into advocates by dropping in marketing-approved content and allowing them to share it at the right time through the right channel. So in a nutshell, that's our factor. It empowers sales reps to harness social selling in the most efficient and productive way and allows sales leadership to finally have a tool to measure that successfully.
Awesome, love it. I think that's actually kind of not only I love it because you not only embrace all of those other factors, but really it's how can you leverage all of these without having it bogging you down, because we all know those not only are those elements important, but stringing all of them together is a full-time job and the scale. So I think that's partially why I love how you use the term advocate and how you drop that in there. So I know question one, what is social advocate and how is it really different from social selling? And as someone that, like my background being employee advocacy, that got me into social selling because I actually figured out the only way that I could get budget was to empower sales and marketing. So I kind of led that way, and I think the advocacy term is interesting because influencer marketing and content. So what does that mean really for you? What is that, and how is it different from social selling?
I mean, I hope me and you can sit here in a year from now, celebrate your 2nd anniversary on the show by talking about social selling doesn't get talked about anymore because now it's just called advocacy. I really hope we get to that point, right? I mean, they're not much different. I think, social selling is the way in, or the way that we should describe it today, and you described exactly why. That's where the money is right now. But ultimately, I think, what we're really aiming for is advocacy. So it's going to probably start with sales, and then it's going to start to sort of permeate the organization. Sales just so happens to be, in most cases now, the primary contact with potential prospects. They could be the first touch point for your company, right? They're out there. They're out touching base, trying to gather information, generate net new leads, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's where social selling has to start, in that area. And then once that's embraced in an organization, I feel that then it opens up the door for true advocacy. And then it's less about driving just revenue, and it's more about overall awareness, reach, and influence for an organization. I think that's the end game.
Interesting. So when you, I guess the advocacy side, when you're kind of talking advocacy and someone really is strung on, I want to use social for selling, and I think unfortunately people think that's the easy button, and we both know that that's not ever the case. How do you kind of walk them down the path of the difference, like the true difference of like, hey, when you embrace advocacy, your end result or maybe your quick wins are this, compared to when you treat it as like a traditional social selling aspect, some of the, I guess, those loopholes there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, starting, if people are looking at it from an advocacy perspective and they say, we would really like to embrace this, let's look at what this program looks like. And, oddly enough, the sponsor of the show, IBM, right? I mean, that's somebody I've worked with in the past in this very regard, right? With the software group and how to turn our folks into advocates, and how do we measure that, right? Is it through just reach? Is it through reach plus engagement plus amplification, right? All those kind of fun stuff. So those metrics were different from an advocacy perspective. It was how many eyeballs can we reach? Can we actually get more clicks overall to our site and drive our customer acquisition cost down, or our CPM down, or whatever that might look like. Whereas when it's a sales conversation, it's all about, we have to look at measuring whether or not we're advancing the sales process, whether or not we're increasing the opportunities we're putting in, or ultimately whether or not we're actually seeing more quota retirement. So I think just looking at it differently ultimately shapes the way the company is going to approach it.
No, I agree, and I think even in the last 2 years we've seen social selling evolve quite rapidly. So for you, kind of being on the ground floor of this and leading the charge, what changes have you seen over the past 12, 18 months?
I've seen massive changes, Rachel. I mean, I think you could hopefully you'd agree with me, but when social selling first came out, I would say 12, 18 months ago, and started to really be adopted in terms of, this is what it is, this is social selling, it's layering social on top of the sales process type thing. It's changed drastically. It's gone from an ad hoc adoption system where 1 or 2 people in an organization say, hey, I just stumbled across something pretty cool here. When I use social media, when I'm doing my sales process, wow, I'm seeing tons of success. I have more information. I have insight that I never had before, right? So that started to happen. And then there was road bumps. Those same people who were empowered to go and do that might have just had a little bit of, maybe too much freedom. And their stumbles happen, right? Marketing wasn't there to support them. They were out finding their content online themselves, maybe not vetting it properly, sharing it, and then causing a little bit of a problem, right? I mean, this had to be harnessed and controlled, and that's where I'm seeing social selling now and how it's changed is now it's starting to be harnessed by sales leadership, by marketing. They're starting to look at it and say, okay, this is something we're going to sink money into. We need proper training, proper tools, and we need a proper process. And I think that's, probably the most exciting thing that I've seen happen over the past year.
So do you see it as more of a marketing-enabled sales process? I know in the companies that I've worked for, it seems like marketing has been the spearhead versus, the VP of sales coming and saying, we need to get on social.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot more of the adverse now than we used to see, which is exciting. I think last year and previously it was only a marketing play. I think that was what was happening, but now I'm seeing a lot more from a sales perspective. I think sales enablement and sales leadership, the VPs, they're now seeing the need to do this. It's another channel, and I mean, when you think about what they're charged to do, it's about, a VP of sales enablement, for example. He needs to give his team reps the right tools to succeed, and that just happens to be social media right now. So they're hunting for those tools, and I think that's now in the budget, and I think it's now much more of a sales conversation. And I think not only, to state that, I think to your point earlier, it still involves marketing, Bill. It's still a joint decision. It has to live in both places. Marketing has to put the content in a proper program for sales to use. They can't go do it themselves, but they're the ones that actually ultimately have to execute on it. So there's got to be some new form of collaboration that takes place as far as I'm concerned. And it's easily done with a meeting a week between sales and marketing leadership.
Yeah, I think tool evolution has definitely helped a lot. And speaking of content, we actually have a question from Jack. He's asking if R-Factor will give suggested content for different stages in the sales process for a rep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think, thanks, Jack, for asking it. One of the great things about R-Factor is you can actually organize your view according to your CRM. So if it just happens to be Salesforce, you can actually start monitoring folks who are just in a specific pipeline stage. And that starts to get exciting because now all of a sudden, marketing can say, hey, for anybody who's in this particular stage, share this content with them. Should they get should we represent a social partnership? Should we, give them some awareness content? So that can all be prompted and then shared directly within the R-Factor platform. So absolutely. Thanks, Jack.
No, that's awesome. And something that came up to my mind, and I just tweeted it out there, but when you were saying, I love how you talk about advocacy and training and investing in it, and part of what I always kind of changed the conversation on social selling was, when we think about someone networking or going to a bar for happy hour, right? We didn't train them on how to do that. We didn't really, I wouldn't say we invested in them. We usually, approve their expense reports. But I wouldn't say that social selling was the same as that. And I think, unfortunately, leadership was treating those two as the same. And it's like, well, we'll let them do that. But, if someone was staring at their Twitter feed, they would say, go down to the bar and go network. Yet, the Twitter feed gives you a global opportunity. But at the same time, if you're not leveraging the data, we were talking about social listening on proximity based. I mean, even intelligent, you're doing business intelligence and those kind of things. That's really when social selling becomes a game changer, but it has to be invested in, it has to be trained on. So I love that term advocacy and the way you presented it because it really does make it more of like this suite and solution that can help empower you. It's not the easy button, it's not one size fits all, but it's not the same as like, hey, set up a Twitter account, you're now social selling. And I think that's kind of an important misnomer that I think has missed the mark early on, and hopefully we're changing that because I feel like the change is there, and I'll take that a year from now we're not talking about social selling, we're just talking about all of the ways we can leverage social and advocacy being such an important one. So when we're talking about these things and these steps and these processes of advocacy, what is that first step that a business should take when they're trying to implement one of these programs to really kind of grow and kind of reach success?
Great question. I mean, the first question I would ever consider asking myself in that particular instance is, where are my customers at, first of all? Before even thinking about what a strategy might look like, it's, are my customers on social or potential customers or potential brand advocates on social? And I think the idea there is to look at your customer base and kind of map them backwards, right? kind of take a reverse engineering approach and figure out, okay, what's their demographic look like? And based on that, where do they live, right? Are they mid-30s, female skewed? Then, is Pinterest the place you got to be? Are they, much more of a B2B situation where it's, decision makers of a higher average age and education, and that's got to be LinkedIn. So figuring that out from just a reverse engineering standpoint would be a great place to start. And then once that's done, I think, and you hit on it earlier, is it's training, absolutely. It's before we get in here and jump in, let's do this. And I consider social selling, I don't know how many of you will identify this might be Canada speak up here, but like the luge, when you think of the Olympics, you just jump in and go. And it could be, you could have a chance to win the gold medal without even ever playing the luge in your life, right? Then transferring it over to bobsledding, where now all of a sudden you're on the same course, but there's a team working together, you're doing the right things, you're systematically going through the course. That's what social selling needs to be today, and an advocacy program needs to be. And I think making sure that you have a strategy and approach, and that includes the right training, the right technology, and just an overall buy-in, I think are three things that need to be considered before jumping in to a program. And of course, how to measure it is the next thing, which is a big piece of what people are asking today. And I would suggest figure out, what that looks like for you, but I would suggest adoption should be one of the biggest things you should be concerned about right off the start. Are people adopting this program so that we can honestly see if it works? And I think that's a good starting point.
You're making me very happy that you mentioned customer personas. As Brian knows, that's my one of my soapbox rants for this year. We all need to go back and audit who we think we're talking to, because I think most people are wrong. So yay, because I think that's the starting point for not just a solid marketing campaign, but definitely social selling. I think too many companies, to use your analogy, have taken the luge approach and just kind of dove head first, and are now kind of falling back and realizing that they don't know what they're doing and they're not tracking anything. So yes, yay for customer personas.
And I think, I first of all, I would love, any reference to winter sports is always welcome for me. I'm a hockey fan, and if we could fit in curling in there, I think that's perfect. But I love the luge to. I think that's a perfect way of luge to bobsled. And that I think unfortunately that word strategic, and I wrote about this, and the word strategic usually makes it sound like I'm using someone, and really the strategic just means you have a plan towards success. And I think by the way you kind of outline that, it's like, hey, we're training on it. We're taking this funnel of information and now linking it to business goals. And I love that, because unfortunately, I say I strategically build relationships, and that doesn't mean I don't do them without authenticity or transparency or embrace what we're doing. But I have a goal ultimately of where I'm trying to get this to go. Because if not, I think that is when you waste your time on social. I think that's when social becomes the time suck that it can possibly be. And if you don't have those things across the board, and I think your explanation there just made it like my job and Rachel's job so easy, because that's like what we love and preach and believe, and the way you summarize it, I think, is what we hopefully will be driving change as we're moving forward. So I think that also kind of comes down to, I'm curious from a I'd say an implementation step point. You get someone to do that initial buy-in, those first couple steps. Where does it go from there? How do you get some of like the things that, hey, roadblocks? My old CEO used to be called, he said his only job was roadblock removal. And I think that's something we have to think of when we're building these campaigns. So what are some of those common social selling roadblocks that we know people have to kind of avoid?
Yeah, I mean, the roadblocks are going to be there, right? I mean, it starts with, first of all, executive buy-in. That's sometimes a roadblock right off the bat, right? How much investment and resources are actually going to go into this, and will it actually have the legs to be a successful program? But if that's actually, if that is there, that's the battle right there. And then it's training and education. It's right from the ground up. It's a new way of thinking. I mean, in my regard, and when I'm thinking of advocacy, I'm thinking, why do we really do it? And to me, I think of a few different things. I think of Edelman's trust barometer. I think of how they look at who and why we trust each other, and where do we gather information online to help us shape our purchase decisions. And I think the way it's skewing away from corporate messaging and towards real life people, advocates at the company, I think that's a huge piece. So I think educating them with things like that'll open the folks' eyes to why this is such important. I mean, links coming from real people are 3 to 5 times more likely to be clicked than a link coming from a corporate account or whatever that statistic is. It's insane. We need to empower people at the organizations to be sharing the content. And that way it starts to remove such an emphasis on consistent, constant campaigns that cost money, and instead you have a whole symphony of folks at your organization playing the fiddles for you, and it never stops. And I think people need to realize that, and that's a big piece of getting over that initial roadblock, is the education on why it's so important.
Yeah, and I think that's education across the board, no matter what the tool is. I think, that unfortunately, when either people think it's a one-time event, and I always ask them, does change only happen once? And like that is just crazy. I mean, we get enough software updates, almost on a monthly basis, that recurring training is almost required, no matter what you're doing. And the way we leverage Twitter today compared to the year ago when we started Social Selling Hour is two completely different worlds. I mean, even just the way people use Hootsuite, or the way you're engaging on different platforms. So I think that's important. I love that the focus there on training. I'm curious, when you look at these roadblocks and you look at leadership buy-in and knocking down silos, is it? I question the idea. Like, I always like the idea of social marketing and sales kind of not only being aligned but almost being one team, right? And I think that whole idea of social advocacy allows that, because social is not a department job, it's the brand. There's that role affects customer service, affects across the board. Where do you see the roadblock removal, or the roadblock storm, the guys that are storming through the roadblocks? Is that more today the marketing team, or is that more the sales team? Where do you see that? And I guess maybe where can the other team kind of ramp up so that they aren't running into these roadblocks?
Yeah, I mean, where I've seen exciting conversations happen is when somehow you end up in a room and it's got, the VP of customer success, the VP of marketing, and, the VP of sales, and those, or some, mix and match of those leadership positions in those particular departments. And when that happens, I see some excitement happen, right? People start talking about this new concept that we've all heard, should we forget about B2B and B2C and move to this H to H sort of philosophy? How do we empower everybody? And I think, those three organizations, or with its, silos within the organization, I think are the biggest and most concerned about customer touch points right off, initially. You have marketing, customer success, and sales. When those three can come together and start to realize that it doesn't have to be siloed, and they can actually meet once in a while on their own without the rest of their teams, and actually, get in a room together with those three individuals or those three entities, then that's when people start to realize that, wow, we can put something together here. We can put a plan together and drive this through the organization. So I think the first step in removing the roadblocks is realizing that the way we've currently done things up until today doesn't have to continue. There can be a whole new entity formed within your organization. I think Altimeter calls it the Center of Excellence, for example, where we take a few people, right, and put them together and say, now you're charged with driving this initiatives. And that's where I've seen it work. And I mean, IBM is, again, a great example of that, by putting together a team that's specifically tasked with driving thought leadership, advocacy across the board. And I can see it, within their, their numbers. It's huge.
So I know that when Brian Kramer hears H to H in his chat, he dings bells. I'll give the plug that I have his book sitting right here on my desk, and he's unfortunately been alongside of me the last 3 weeks, and I'll be at South by with him. But no, I love the H to H concept. I love the idea. I preach so much about it. Changing the philosophy to create new experiences, and I think you hit that so home, so well. And you're getting lots of shout-outs from some of the awesome guys over at Hootsuite that, it's nice that we have more Canadians on SBiz Hour. So that's a big one as well. And I think, even this idea of selling on social, I know that kind of is going on in Twitter right now, and really, I have Jay Baer's book with utility above, on my shoulder, because that was a big one for me, when he was just like, when you're helping with content, you're giving things away, you're then establishing that trust. And I guess I'm curious, and this question isn't really on our scripted, but trust, I think, is that part where, you brought up IBM, and I've been working with them a lot, and they just trust. They just trust their employees. They trust across the board, and maybe it's only in this new group because IBM is as big as a small country, but that idea of trust, to get that to happen, you have to start small and you have to grow. But trust, how does that trust kind of relay? Because change is scary, and you have to trust your employees to grow advocacy. If not, I think you're dead in the water for any social selling program.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust has to be there, and I'm just going to sort of step back and just even look at it from a social selling sliver, and then we'll expand out. But the same thing is, do you trust your employees? Yes. Well, okay. Is there also going to be days where you personally are going to go to the office and forget to check their sources or forget to like read through an article before sharing, and then maybe it puts a competitor in a good light, that type of thing? Yes. So that stuff is going to happen, and when you scale it out at such a massive scale as like an IBM or a large global company like that, you got to start to think, well, how much can we afford to have that happening, right? And I think there's an element of trust, there's an element of empowering people on social to go out and share content, but I still think that there needs to be an overarching sort of control mechanism in place. It's a juggling act between containing your employees and empowering them. And I think that there's a gray area in between that they can play in. And I think we can trust them, but at the same time, mechanisms should be put in place to just make sure that there's no swear words going out, that there's, you know, XYZ happening. There's no articles being shared about X, right? So that's going to come from the marketing support. So yes, I think, you know, there's trust that has to be there for sure. And that's going to come, but I also think that for it to work properly and to make sure everything works strategically, I think that there has to be an element of control as well.
Yeah, and I always say, instead of the word, I always like to use the, you know, guardrails, right? You don't want to give them the entire whiteboard, because not only is that intimidating, but that's what really scares everybody about all of these fire hose and all this information. Everybody can do everything wrong, but if you give them guardrails and if you focus on the how and the why, and I think that's part of the problem with, I think, that initial social selling term was you just told them this is what you need to do, social sell. And you didn't tell them how to do it with content. You didn't tell them why relationships were important. You know, you didn't send them Ted Rubin's book on return relationships. I mean, but you didn't build those how and the why, because the what almost ends up telling the story for you when you build the how and the why side. So I love that conversation, and I know like the Twitter's feed is blowing up. Your notifications are going to be out the wazoo there, because I think, you know, you're hitting on some strong points that, you know, we kind of talked before the show. Our show used to be called Social Selling Hour, and we kind of bridged in this social business concept, because social is a business-wide discussion. And what you're saying is what I wish every sales leader, every social selling guru, whatever they are out there that wants to label themselves, it's understanding these basic concepts of that change and that training and the guardrail. I love it. I mean, I can't get enough of it. So I think that's, you know, that's perfect into this social advocacy as a business differentiator. And like, this is, I think, you know, you brought up Altiminator, and I had the luxury of sitting down with Ray Wang last week, and he was kind of explaining some of these things from really companies that are understanding this economy we're living on. It's not the sharing economy. It's really how they're leveraging all of this data and these tools to be the, you know, to differentiate themselves and create these new experiences. So why are some companies still not embracing this idea of social advocacy and this social selling across the board?
Aside from the obvious reason that they could be slightly crazy, then I don't know, Brian, but no, I'm just kidding. No, absolutely. I mean, I can understand, too, not wanting to jump in always into something new, you know, 2 feet in. I think it's just a question of the typical, you know, technology or, you know, adoption life cycle as you lead to the mainstream, and then, you know, of course, there's your early adopters, and we've seen that. We've seen IBM, SAP, some of the big players be early adopters in the space, and they've proven it out, and they're kind of going through some of the best practices and operationalizing those for the rest of the folks to take on. And I think, you know, just looking at things from it's the first time we're doing things, right? I mean, it's tough. It's the first time we're all learning. As you mentioned, there's no manual, there's no guidebook in place right now. I think there's a lot of different things that people have to go through before we figure out and do it properly, right? So, I mean,
change is scary. I think that's, you know, and I think now it's one of those things where we can no longer ignore it, and you're either going to choose to invest in it and embrace it, or you're going to choose to half-ass it, and you're going to get half-ass results. And I think that's where it comes down to this discussion. And one of the things that I think we could talk about IBM and you know, they're a sponsor of our show, and they have this new way to work hashtag, which I love because it is about this new philosophy. But Brian Kramer actually had a good question, and I think I'm going to kind of twist it a little bit, because he asked, you know, from our factor perspective, it's targeted towards enterprises. And I guess the larger question is, you know, when a small business or mid-sized business and an enterprise are trying to adopt these, I think the small business, the path between the sales team and the leadership is smaller, which is usually a better case for buy-in and training, where the enterprise has the large scale. But the failure and the time management is so much more critical on the small business. So I'm curious, from your experience and really from the tool side, is enterprise where the wins are happening today, or where does that kind of fall in enterprise, small business, mid-size when we're talking social selling and advocacy?
And I think it's both. I think, you got to look at it a couple different ways. Like, for a small organization, I mean, the benefits are so huge. The potential reward is so massive, right? You're able to get so much out of social if you do it properly. Instead of companies who have so much spend that they can consistently throw out there to drown out everybody, social's provided a whole new avenue and an opportunity for companies to take on advocacy into a smaller organization and roll it out and see success. I think that's exciting. But I also, as you mentioned, have to consider the other side, and that's the resources, time, money. It's the same thing when, I used to consult on Google AdWords, and it's, you better be in there every single day checking, because if you don't, your budget is just going to go like that, and it's over. I mean, it's done, right? For a small business who's going to roll that out, it's a different ballgame. It has a different level of attention. So that's the same thing I would say to a small or mid-sized organization rolling it out. The benefits are huge, but you have to make sure you do it properly, and there's a number of folks out there, I mean, yourself, I mean, that's who I would go to look at what are those first steps in doing it properly. Finding someone who knows their stuff that you can share those best practices for. I think they're out there now, so there's no excuse to approach things in a non-strategic manner. But I think enterprise is also where it's at. I think they have the money, they have the data right now to tell them this is what they need to do. I think, it's no secret that, Dell, IBM, all those folks that have massive amounts of data were some of the first individual companies to actually push towards this realm, right? I think the data told them this is what we need to do. We're getting more clicks this way. We're driving costs down, customer acquisition costs, and that big machines love those things, right? So I think it's a no-brainer for them to adopt as well. I just think it's a different approach, and a level of attention and detail for smaller organizations is crucial.
Yeah, I often use the thing I always say, if IBM, as big as IBM, if they can embrace change, what's your freaking excuse, right?
Totally, right?
I mean, but at the same time, and I understand where Brian Kramer is coming with that question, and really, it's the same with all small businesses. It's like, where do you assess time? How do you prioritize? Where does the tool fit in your workflow? I think too often we grab a tool and we think the tool is the easy button, and our workflow doesn't match it, and the culture hasn't changed or embraced it, and those kind of things. So I think that's also interesting. I know Rachel has. Rachel's experience with Pipeliner and what they're doing from a listening and really embracing content and kind of building more of this, path to purchase with a customer persona, I think has huge value. So, I mean, Rachel, from your side, from the small business versus enterprise thing, I think you probably have a little bit of insight on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I guess it does vary. I mean, I know enterprise, just their massive size gives them a leg up if they're able to do employee advocacy well. It's hard to slow them down. However, startups and SMBs do have the luxury of hiring for cultural fit, and I think that also makes employee advocacy a lot easier. And you don't have those concerns of whether someone's going to misrepresent you on social because they're of the same mindset. They're moving in the same direction. And that's just been my experience. But we haven't really had those issues just because you can look around and see them, and you know that they're always going to put their best foot forward. But when you scale, you've got tens of thousands of employees. You're going to hire because you need that certain job role secured, regardless of whether they're the nicest person in the pack, but they're highly qualified skill-wise. But again, not everybody has to be social, so that's a whole other conversation. So I guess we're talking about now like social selling gone wrong. So what are your experiences with some companies, again, diving head first and then, failing horribly, and are they able to pull themselves out of it?
Well, I mean, there's definitely some good examples, that's for sure. And luckily, for the most part, they've happened by individuals, less so on a massive scale. So I think that's a good thing right now. I think that's where we're at, is the individual luge participants going about their day-to-day and finding these pitfalls and mishaps. And I think a couple things. First off the bat, it's hard selling, right? And that's the horrible thing about having social selling mashed together, is if you're somebody who's just embracing it, it's easy. It's selling on social. So I just go on, and just like my email and my phone, I just sell. And I see a lot of people doing that, and unfortunately that's the absolute opposite way of social selling. It's going out there, adding value, not hard selling yourself, proving that you're a leg up, that you're prepared, that you have value as a consultant or a salesperson, and then now building your case to have a conversation. to take it to the next level. It's the opposite when people are going on there and absolutely selling right off the bat. I mean, LinkedIn is a great example of that. Any of us that open our inboxes, probably one of those 10 emails in there is going to be somebody who's saying, hey, you should just buy this, and it's the first time that they've ever written an email and you just connected with them. So I think doing those things is not good, especially in a world of screenshots and social and all that fun stuff, because then that's how it can actually affect a company at a larger scale. If somebody does something that's quite silly or that is to the point where it should be called out, or some people feel the need that they do that publicly. I'm not a huge fan, but somebody might take a screenshot and call it out. And then now it's a huger issue on a larger scale. So that's why training is such a big deal when rolling out social selling, because these things will happen.
Well, and I think part of that comes into the idea where not only is that going to happen, but if you build that relationship, and I'll give a shout out, Roberto Blake on Twitter said brands have to build loyalty and community if they want to leverage social advocacy, and I think that's a home run right there. I mean, when you build that community, you build the loyalty and authentic connection. When you do screw up, they're going to do it in a non-public way. They're going to give you that, because a lot of times I feel, and Rachel's like, I think one of the best leaders in that, is that when someone screws up and auto DMs you or sends one of those LinkedIn messages, for me, if they have a relationship with me before, I'll kind of reach out. But Rachel does a great way of kind of almost teaching them every time, like, hey, there's a bit of a better way of doing this, and she's better at that than I am. But I think part of the problem is a lot of these people don't know they're doing it wrong unless someone tells them, and they don't realize that things have changed, and this goes to everything. I mean, this is people that thought they wrote a book on social media 5 years ago. It's not relevant today. Like, I don't care what you did to buy your followers or do what you did. It's no longer working today. Mm-hmm. But when you build that community, you build that loyalty, and you screw up, the failure is so much smaller, because not only do they forgive you, but they almost kind of cushion the blow. Where these other brands, and I take this across the board, when a brand screws up that has no relationship with their community, I mean, be prepared for every backlash that you've ever heard of. So I like that idea too, because I think failing fast is scary, but if you do the community work and that loyalty ahead of time, that failing fast is just a learning process to get to that success. I love that. It's a great. I think, Rachel, is there a question out there from John?
Yeah, we actually have two great questions. They're actually both related to content. So one from John Golden. He's asking, how do you guard against social advocacy outreach turning into social spam? So, if you have, this army of advocates, but they're just sending out, the same message all the time, that could, people turn a blind eye to that too.
Yep, absolutely. Great question. And I think if I could say one thing, it would be you can't automate authenticity. So despite having an advocacy program and pushing content out, that's not the entire program. I feel that there's still a lot more to it. I think, if you're going to be sharing company-related content, it has to be part of a larger strategic approach. So one of the things, I mean, going back to a 4-1-1 strategy, where if you're going to put out 6 pieces of content, if one of them is going to be a product page and one's going to be a blog post, right, then 4 of those posts should be completely unrelated to your company. It should be third-party content that's going out there, so that you're avoiding.
Why would we share something from everyone else? We know it all. I'm just joking. No, I love that, because I think, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that right there is like, people are so afraid to share other people's content, but yet nobody likes to know it all. Nobody wants to hear only your brand crap. I mean, like, that is why you get unfollowed, muted, deleted. So I love that, and continue on that. But I think that's an awesome statement for sure.
Yeah, great point, Brian. I mean, I think that's exactly how it is. I think we all need to figure out our own formula that's going to work for us. How much, content should we be sharing versus, of our own content versus third-party people's content? And I think there should be a huge gap. You should be sharing tons more people's content. I think that's how you build community. It's giving credibility and credit to other people, giving some love, and then they're going to show you some back. And I think that's something that Rachel does extraordinarily well. I really appreciate that when I see it online, because I think it's so needed in all organizations, is somebody going out there and pruning and building your community so that when there's a fall, they step up and catch you and do the work for you. You almost can get away with not having a customer service team at that stage. I would never say that to anybody and have it written down, but you could also get away with that at certain levels.
Yeah, actually, I agree. My predictions for the future of business is that, frontline roles, will be very fluid, and so you won't have a set customer service, support, sales. It'll just be this one person who, will migrate to what the contact needs. But again, perfect topic for another day. So the next question is from Jack, and I love this question. He's asking, do you suggest that companies share their competitors' content, and if so, why? And I have a pretty firm opinion on this, but I'm curious to know what yours is.
You know what? I mean, that's an approach that's going to be different from everybody. I mean, if you're in finance and in one of those industries, it's probably not something that you'd see happen too often. Me personally, it depends. If you're building your personal brand and you want to truly add value, I think there's a certain level of agnostic ability that you have to kind of show, where you're not just pitching products that are your friends or your families, but you're being honest and unbiased. But reality of the matter is, I mean, I would never be having anybody on my team sharing my competitors' content unless it was something that was so bad that I wanted more eyeballs on it. But save that, it's not part of a strategy that I've ever seen happen at scale.
So my approach to this, and and again, it comes back to reading content, because obviously you're not going to share something that's a blatant sales pitch.
Wait a second, hold on, I gotta cut you off again. People are reading their content they're sharing now? Jesus Christ.
My second soapbox rant of the year. I think as long as you or somebody in your team is vetting content, it is perfectly fine to share competitors' content, and I think it actually places you at a higher level, because it shows that you're very well versed in everything that's going on in your industry. You're a trusted resource, and at the end of the day, you need to know what's going on. So if someone wants you to compare A, B, and C, you should be able to in a second. You should not only just flip it and like, oh well, we're the best. You should say, no, actually, this guy will serve you better in that need. And then, however, just there's a way to pitch it to where you're showcasing your value, whether as an individual or a company, and I think it's perfectly fine to leverage competitors' content. For me, there's no downside unless it's a sales pitch and you're now their advocate.
Well, and I think part of it, I firmly believe in the idea of when you teach to drive philosophy change, it takes an army to drive that change. So if you're a competitor or someone that is you're kind of fighting for the same business is helping drive that overall philosophy change. Ideally, if you're confident in what the service you're providing and that your end value to that customer, aligning with them in that philosophy change, and then ultimately squaring off whenever they embrace the change. I think that's a great way to kind of drive this change. I mean, I think influencer marketing is a great example of that, because I've been very lucky to work with a couple of big brands in influencer marketing, and what they're doing is scares the crap out of a lot of other brands, because they're empowering a lot of influencers to sit side by side with employees, and they're not telling the influencer what to create, what to share, or what to do. They're just giving them this inside knowledge and saying, if you think this is valuable, do with what you wish. Well, this same influencer can be sitting at one event this week and at different competitors next week, but part of that trust is the fact that ultimately we'll outshine at the end, but we need this independent third story voice to kind of go through it forth. And that's actually partially why I liked when you used the term advocacy up front, because I think of advocacy as that employee advocacy, it's customer advocacy, and there's the element of that influencer advocacy, because I think that it's all of us together are going to drive that change, build a community. Unfortunately, a lot of times when we think social selling, it's only empowering our employees. When you're like, wow, your biggest fans can probably be your best salesperson if you actually truly embrace that. So I kind of love this way that this advocacy. You won me over on the idea of social advocacy. I can promise that'll be one that I'll be using moving forward. So I think we're going to jump into the next question here. We have about 15 minutes left, and keep bringing in the questions on the Twitters. I know I saw Vidar jump in there and saying sharing, leveraging competitors' content is fine. You're showing that you are a trusted resource, and nobody speaks that truth better than Vidar. And his tool Metal is a great tool for doing that, because not only there's an element of sharing content and hitting retweet, but you're able to share something and add insights to it. You're able to put your own spin, your own thought leadership on it, because I mean, yes, I don't want see all of my competitors' feed in my news feed, but if I'm able to see one of my employees adding some spin to what my competitors were showing, it kind of links us to as saying like, hey, this company might be the industry leader, but my employee is also a thought leader. I think that's an important kind of note, and I know Vidar kind of believes in that as well. But when we're talking about the right tool to add to process and accountability and social advocacy and selling programs, what is the right tool, and how can they kind of look at the right tool to add in the process? Like, what are the things they need to think of when they're thinking about tools? And I think this is an interesting one for a lot of the people in our community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just no one tool that does it. I think that there's just so many tools out there that do tremendous things in certain areas. If I think, from an advocacy perspective, what do you need? What do you need to truly understand how you're doing and how to deploy an advocacy program? I think that you need, a tool that is an amazing content delivery tool, some sort of mechanism that folks from different parts of the organization can put in real-time content and get out to your workforce, to your partners, to your channel partners, to advocates that are just fans of the company. How is there a way what is that way? What is the tool that you're going to disseminate your content through? And I think that's the first part, is figuring out a tool that can do that. I think whether this tool or another tool is involved in the process, the measurement piece has to be there, is how many people are we actually reaching? I think out of an advocacy play, I think two of the most important things are how many eyeballs and new folks are we touching and reaching through this program, but also what is the sentiment of our brand now that we're doing this? Is it changing? Is it remaining the same? Is it growing? Are we having a positive sentiment in the overall crowd? So as you're growing your community, it's just so important as you're growing it to make sure that the garden is pruned nicely and you have the right vegetables in it. So I think ensuring that you have the right influencers and advocates acting on your behalf and the brand is growing, I think that's another thing that you have to consider. And I think there's just so many other things. I mean, let me ask you, Brian, what would you recommend? What do you think from an advocacy perspective? Measurement, content distribution, what is missing in that mixture?
Well, and I think it's kind of identifying what you're trying to solve with the tool, right? And I can't stand when I hear people talk about, we want the culture to do this, we want the people to do this, and this is the tool we bought. And I've never found a tool that fixes people and culture problems, right? Like, it amplifies, it scales, it allows you to do great. It makes great things scalable and amplifiable. But when you're a crappy culture to begin with, no tool is going to fix that. And I do like that you said, no one tool fits all. I had a blog post that said 40+ personal branding tools, and everybody was like, 40+ tools, and I wouldn't say that I recommend 40 tools for everybody, but I agree there's no easy button, and there's really so many different facets. And I think the idea of big data, I think, is a huge value for competitive intelligence, social enablement. But you have to understand what that data is first. So first, understanding, getting a tool that shares content so that eyeballs. I think you brought up sentiment that made me smile, because I hear a marketer say that. You don't hear a salesperson say that very often. But if you have a salesperson say, hey, I can tell you what the impact of this content had on this person, they would jump for joy. I think the idea that they don't even realize that data is available is partially a problem across social tools and social in general. So I love that philosophy. I think the other part is really starting on the, hey, this is the what we want to solve, and this is how and why we want to get there, and then look at the tools that way. Because if you look at the other way, there's so many tools. Every tool has the right answer. But when you break it down smaller, it's like, well, I could use this tool for this tool for that. I mean, that's why. I mean, I get into the battle all the time, and this is just in social, is I don't believe it's Hootsuite versus Buffer. I love and leverage both of the tools for every great benefit they have of each. And they have great cultures, and they have great people, and they have great tools. And if you're able to accept that and use both of them, that's how you get true scale versus someone that looks at it and says, I want to only use this one tool for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, bang on. I would love that answer, and I think that's the way it has to be. There's just no other way around it. Everything is custom. Everything is up to what you're trying to achieve, what your business goals are, and then knowing those, you can map them to the right tool. So I think that's a great response.
And I'm just going to chime in with that. There's no tool that's a set and forget scenario. I think especially in social and social selling, everything needs to be augmented and tweaked, and definitely paying attention to the data that's coming in. Sentiment is huge, and adjusting proactively. And I think people go wrong because they'll put a process in place and they'll let it loose for 9 months, and then they audit, and it's like, no. It was crap for 7 of those 9 months. And I think if you're, whether it's on a weekly or monthly basis, if you regularly audit, you can hone quickly and come up with a winning process that then you can confidently go forward with.
I mean, is there any better testing ground than social for A/B testing on what we're doing? I mean, it's the real. I mean, you want to get me fired up, which I can get fired up on lots of things, but I mean, it's the idea that says I want feedback, and I don't know the feedback of my team or my community or my customers, and I just want to be like, well, then can you please turn in your resignation, because there is no excuse not to have that active feedback. Sadly, all you have to do is ask a lot of times. Go to your biggest fans. I'll give a shout out to Meshfire, one of the social tools out there. They've built a great group of fans, and what they do is they just ask you, like, do you like this part of our tool? And they get a lot of hard truths, but because they embrace that, their tool is constantly updating, and the amount of updates and features over, I'd say, a 6-month period is amazing. And it's because they didn't say, I'm going to let those people use my tool and nobody complains, so I guess everybody loves it. I mean, they actually forcefully went out there and said, give me the hard truths. Tell me why we're not as good as this tool or not as good as this other tool. And I think it's scary, but the companies that do it, I think, are kind of the ones that will really kind of move forward for sure. So I think we're going to jump into question 8 now. We have about 8 minutes left, so 8 and 8. So that kind of works out good. I love the buzz going on Twitter, and thank you everybody on Twitter for chiming in and sharing all the insights that you guys are doing across the board, and especially on this Apple holiday as a Apple fanboy with all the Apple Watch stuff. But I think predictions for the future and really how this idea of advocacy is really going to matter for sales, employee advocacy, this whole story of a social business. What are some predictions? And I'm not going to ask 5 years from now. Let's just see the future in the sense of this new way to work, this way that we're going to drive forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about it today. I think the next step is that that overall sort of cultural shift and change, I think, that we're in the midst of right now. I think it's happening as we speak. I think leadership is now starting to look at this is a bigger play. Advocacy is huge. Right? When you think of social selling, I mean, it's social selling. It's activating your sales force and getting them on social and having them do the right things at the right time, etc. But when you think of advocacy, it's a bigger play. And I think that's the exciting thing is as we see this push and realization that advocacy is the next step for an organization to activate people within their org, but also outside of their org, I think that's exciting, and I think that's my prediction. I think it's going to be fun because, as we mentioned earlier, I want to see organizations get outside themselves. I want to see how real good brands who have pruned their garden, who have taken care of their customers, they're going to have a really nice go in the next couple years because they have that community on their side, and it's like they just tripled or 10x their employee base by doing this. So I think that's exciting, and for me, it's the emergence of these companies that I'm excited to see over the next little bit. How about you?
No,
I'm loving your analogies. We went from the luge to now we're in the garden. This is awesome. It must be because it's sunny there today.
Yeah, that's it. I got lucky.
So we have another question. Another one from Jack, and he's asking, what industry segments are the best fit for social selling, and who should adopt now?
And we're going to send Jack the consulting bill because he's bringing awesome questions, and it's love you, Jack.
Yeah, great question, Jack. I think that's an awesome question for everybody to consider who's thinking about moving into social selling. There's just no company that's too big, too small, or segment that should not be using it. Bottom line is everybody's on social. It should not be about whether you're in this industry or that industry. It's where are your customers, and everybody's on social. We're all there in one way, shape, or form. We're on Facebook, we're on Pinterest, we're on Instagram. It's just figuring out where's the best spot for you to be. So I think every organization needs to jump on it now. I think media and entertainment should have been on it, years ago. In this case, because it's such an open community there. I think technology companies, this is a huge space for you. If you're selling software, SaaS software, B2B, if you're not on social, on LinkedIn and on Twitter, that's a huge problem. If you're not there already, well, please reach out, please do something. And I think, just all the other segments are they should be there too. There's just nobody that's escaping it. Customers are there, they're basing their decisions on what they find online. It's as simple as that.
No, I love that. And I think that's, part of what I believe this whole predicting the future of what we're going to is, we're going to empower the brand's greatest asset of a brand being their employees. Allowing these employees to be the rock stars you hired them for, the rock stars that you believe in, the reason you pay them what you pay them. And when you're able to leverage that, put them on the pedestal, invest in them, I think that's when this whole game goes. It's a social across the board, because then you have your product manager is now presenting at product manager events, and that's a form of selling. I can remember my previous CEO, he had a huge sign. He always said, everyone sells, because if you're on an airplane sitting next to someone, they ask what you do, it's an opportunity to sell. No, you're not closing the deal, but you're starting the story. You're the first window into you, and probably you're not going to sell them there, but you sure as hell can ruin a sale right there. And I think it's the idea of when we empower and trust these awesome rockstar employees that we have, and they know the story. Because if you have a crappy story and you've been hiding behind a line, unfortunately you're going to be exposed here recently, in this near future. I think that's maybe the scary part, the people that are kind of shunning on the advocacy side and saying that trust is impossible and no loyalty exists in these millennials and all these excuses. It's okay, well, that's probably because your product sucks, your story sucks, or you've been riding on something for way too long, and then you're afraid to pull back the covers. Because I think that's part of what I'll give another shout out to IBM on that side. I mean, IBM, I remember thinking of them as the big blue jacket company, and now they have data scientists that are presenting in bow ties and Chuck Taylors, and it's because they're embracing that for who they are, and by doing that, they're allowing them to be extremely successful. And I think that's kind of this whole key. I love this advocacy topic. I mean, you hit home to my heart, especially from the idea of driving this change and across the board. So I guess before we head out, give people a little bit more information where they can contact you. I know we'll get some links out. Also, R Factor, give any of the plugs that you need to on there, because this was awesome, action-packed hour.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, everybody. Thank you for joining me. It's been an awesome hour. If you have any questions about social selling, how to get involved, how your company should implement it, what are the first steps, hit me up. I'd be happy to help. I'm always here. I'm always available. You can reach me at Julio Visco on Twitter. LinkedIn, very easy, LinkedIn/IN/social selling. R Factor, that's RFACTR.com. There's no O. Check us out, hit me up, would love to connect, and have an amazing day.
Awesome. We love it. And, as always, thank you to the community. Thank you to IBM, New Way to Work, for sponsoring this event. I'm excited. I'm heading to South by Southwest the end of the week, so if you guys are on the Twitters, make sure you're following me. I'm gonna do some meerkatting. I'm gonna do some cool things. I'm presenting on digital engagement on Monday, so I'm excited for that. Rachel, send us out of here. What else do we got on the plate? millennialceo.com/sbizhours, where you can find all of the previous episodes. Not one we had previously, but one that this one will be up there as well very soon. So what else do we got, Rachel?
I just want to say thank you to Julio. This has been awesome. I actually took notes on a couple things, and a big shout out to our girl on Twitter, Kristen Kurdos.
Yes.
For pulling in the questions for us and making it super easy to rock the video here. I appreciate you.
Awesome. You guys rock. It's truly, it's a game changer with Hangout Chat. We're able to bring in awesome thought leaders who spend an hour of their time with us, and that's the true essence of community. So with that, we will see you next week, same time, same channel.